It's happening. It's finally happening. The energy transition is here. And it's happening across many different countries in three areas especially: solar PV, wind, and electric vehicles. I'm Scott McKnight. Time for your 10-minute charge. So why the energy transition? Or better yet, why now? Sure, the carbon commitments from companies and governments are important here. But renewables are recently making a serious economics case too. Renewable energy has been falling in price steadily. That's compared to the varying, sometimes up, sometimes down price of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. That means these renewable energy technologies, the solar PV modules, the wind turbines, the electric vehicles, and electric vehicle batteries, just keep getting cheaper to produce. They get more efficient and they get less material intensive. That means none of this is going away. But unlike those fossil fuels, the coal, the natural gas, and the oil, as well as that expensive nuclear, these renewable energy forms like wind and definitely solar are only getting more competitive, and they'll only get more popular and more cheaper to manufacture, to install, and to deploy in years to come. I'm Scott McKnight. I research innovation, energy, and global politics. In this episode of the 10-Minute Charge Up, we're going to take a look at this renewable revolution, how it's happening, where it's happening, and finally, some very, very good news. This is a time to be hopeful. Let's charge up. Let's start with the power sector. That's a huge source of carbon emissions in the world still, but it may be the most straightforward way to decarbonize. Is there really a straightforward way to decarbonize? Let's stay hopeful. If we're thinking about how the energy transition will play out, it's basically two things that need to happen. First, get all kinds of clean sources of power onto the grid. And second, plug in as much as possible. So let's start with the first part then. The global electricity system has never been cleaner. That's the good news. Clean power accounted for more than 40% of global electricity sources in 2024. That's hydropower, the OG of clean energy, nuclear, but record amounts of wind and especially solar. Solar is on full YOLO mode, undergoing absolutely parabolic growth. There isn't a Moore's law in energy, but this is pretty much the closest thing to it. In 2024, solar was the largest driver of new electricity growth, rising by 474 terawatt hours. That's a 29% increase in just 1 year alone. And solar is getting installed everywhere. Check out the rooftops in your neighborhood, the roofs of factories in your town, or really any open field there along your county roads. You're going to see solar. Solar is being deployed in every setting, big and small, and it's happening also in pretty much every country. And I mean really like every country. Solar grew by nearly 30% in 2024, and it's pretty much doubling every 3 years. Incredible stuff. The energy transition was always going to be a solar revolution at heart. It's a manufactured good after all, scalable, and so it can enjoy those falling costs and growing efficiencies, not unlike your flat screen TV or your smartphone. China has entered the chat. It's already a pretty significant piece of global trade in its own right, and no wonder it's been a source of trade tensions between the US, the European Union, and China for over a decade as well. Now, for poorer countries or those without fossil fuels or really with very unreliable electricity supply, this is a pretty cheap and easy way to get power. Oh, but solar doesn't work when it's dark, I've been told. That's where the batteries come in. And hooking this solar up to batteries, that's really the latest frontier. And then dispatching that solar generated power during nighttime through those batteries, that's really the game changer. Check out what's happening here in California. That's really the tip of the spear. Battery prices also keep falling and falling and falling. More on that in a minute. That takes us to another area to be excited about: electric vehicles. The EV revolution. And yes, it is a revolution, and yes, it is happening, and yes, it is unfolding, and no, it's not going to stop. You'll feel this differently depending on where you live. Over half of new car sales last year in China were for EVs. Norway has practically completely phased out the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles, and you can go to a few other countries where really their impacts are being felt. Now, for many years until very recently, the EV market was basically a three-place story. China, of course, the European Union, and the United States. That was then, this is now. The EV revolution now is fully global, or globalizing. Now we've got a bunch of newcomers here. Brazil, Mexico, Vietnam, Uzbekistan, sure. All kinds of new countries with more to come. For those newcomers or smaller markets, it's Chinese EVs, which are very cost competitive, that are really all up in this business. This is a major source of exports for China and a major way that these vehicle markets, they are starting to electrify their fleets. Let's get to the wind sector. Okay, this one isn't as straightforward, but it can really make a dent when deployed at scale. Wind projects are complex feats of engineering, much more capital intensive, much bigger and very visible, which brings in that whole local community stuff, and therefore more susceptible to interest rates, to regulation, to government policies, community resistance, all kinds of things really that could get in the way. But when installed, especially those gargantuan turbines offshore, they can make a real impact. Check out any of China's half-dozen giant turbine companies that are breaking records for power generation every few months or so. Actually, there's really a race to the top taking place in the wind manufacturing space. The turbines are getting bigger and bigger, capable of generating more power, and that's tough news for suppliers who are really struggling to keep up, to deploy their capital, to make use of all that equipment. But it's great news for consumers and climate enthusiasts. Something big is happening. More than 40% of global electricity came from low carbon sources last year. That share has happened before in the 1940s, except back then the global electricity system was 50 times smaller than what it is today. Sure, in 2024 we burned more coal, more oil, and more natural gas than we've ever done before. That is true. Coal power still generates about 34% of the world's electricity, natural gas about 22%. But that's not going to keep happening. Last year, we deployed many times more wind and solar than ever before, too. And that comes on top of record-breaking years prior to that as well. Wind now accounts for just over 8% of global electricity generation, solar now just under 7%, and both have a lot of growth ahead. This clean energy build-out really needs to keep going because after many years of stagnant demand in Western countries like the US and Canada and the like, electricity demand, well, it's going to pick up and maybe get going in another big way. Let's put off all that talk about AI and data centers off for another episode. Please, let's stay upbeat. Then we go to the big energy gobblers, China and India. These two countries transformed the global energy markets over the last 25 years, and their electricity demands will keep growing in years to come. But their clean energy installations are also galloping ahead too. That means they're in the midst of breaking what the Western countries did. That is to say, more people, higher incomes, longer lives, more power demands, and therefore more carbon emissions. Except it's that last one that China and India are now finally starting to break away from. That's it for this episode of the 10-Minute Charge Up. I'm Scott McKnight. Let me know what you think with a like, subscribe, a comment. I want to hear from you. Until next time.